A man steals a pickup truck, then, while high on drugs, drives down a highway in Kentucky, but in the wrong direction. And if that wasn't bad enough, his terrible actions that day led to the death of a high schooler. Now, years later, the man behind the wheel learns his fate in court. This first began back in early March of 2021. According to the Shelby County Sheriff, they were alerted to a then 28-year-old Michael Dewitt after he knocked on a random person's door asking for John. With no John at that home, the homeowner got suspicious and called 911. But from there, Michael just went on a full-blown crime spree. Deputies caught up with him as he was driving down Highway KY 53. The sheriff said at the time Michael began driving toward oncoming vehicles and was throwing things out of his car. Obviously, deputies tried to stop him. From there, the sheriff said he got out of his car, crossed a barrier wall, and ran south onto the interstate, then into some woods. Officers and deputies from Louisville Metro Police, Kentucky State Police, and the Shelby County Sheriff's Office were all on the search looking for him. But as that was happening, Michael was stealing more things from other people's homes. He changed clothes, he picked up a safe, stole jewelry, and guns. Then he later came across a Ford F-350 pickup truck. According to the woman who owned the truck, Michael pulled a gun on her and told her to go. And from there, you can't even imagine what happens next. Michael reportedly was driving northbound on Dixie Highway in Kentucky, but then crossed over into the southbound side. And that's where he crashed head-on into 17-year-old Madelynn Troutt. Police say the stolen truck hit a pole and Michael tried to leave the scene. That is until other bystanders held on to him until officers arrived. But back to Madelynn. She was rushed to a hospital but tragically never made it out and died at the hospital. The Jefferson County Coroner's Office said the 17-year-old high school cheerleader died of blunt force trauma. Michael, in turn, was also taken to the hospital, and that's when authorities learned more. According to his toxicology report, he had high levels of amphetamines and benzodiazepines in his system. He also had a stolen handgun, a stolen assault rifle on top of the stolen pickup, and was even driving on an expired learner's permit. He was hit with a number of charges, including operating a motor vehicle under the influence of a controlled substance, leaving the scene of an accident, automobile theft, receiving stolen property, possessing a handgun as a convicted felon, murder, and more. But more surprisingly, Michael was out on bond at the time of the crash. You can only imagine, though, how heartbreaking this all was for Madelynn's family and loved ones. According to a GoFundMe page at the time, it wrote, "Madelynn Troutt was taken from us in a horrible way. She was nothing short of the light in a dark place. Let's all come together to show her family what she meant to all of us." Fast forward to October of last year, 3 years after the fatal crash, Michael pleaded guilty after an agreement with the state. That agreement was reportedly for 292 months in prison, or just more than 24 years. But then the sentence was moved down just a little less by 50 months, or 20 years in prison, so we got credit for time served. For Madelynn's family, though, her legacy will forever live on. At the time of her death, she was planning to attend Bellarmine University Nursing School with plans to become a NICU nurse. And if she were still alive, she'd be graduating this year. So to honor her, the school created the Madelynn Troutt Memorial Nursing Scholarship Fund. Plus, that's not all. Madelynn's family also formed an organization called Live Like Madelynn, where their goal is to give opportunities and spread enrichment through the community. Oh, and remember how I mentioned Michael was out on bond when all of this happened? Well, now Madelynn's law is in effect. It's reportedly a part of the Safer Kentucky Act. So what does it all mean? Well, it prevents charitable bail organizations from posting bail of $5,000 or more. And Michael's bail, which was posted by the Bail Project just a week before the crash, was $5,000. All right, well, joining me now to unpack this case even more is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matthew Mangino. Matt, thank you so much for being here today. There's so many different layers in this case. You have the crime spree, you have the defendant steal a pickup truck, he held someone at gunpoint to get that truck, then he drives it on a highway in the wrong way, adding to that, and then kills a 17-year-old girl. What's your reaction to all of this, and have you seen a case like this before?
Well, number one, it's a tragic, horrific situation where this young woman, 17 years old, high school athlete and cheerleader, life is cut short by an individual who really seems very selfish and someone who has flaunted the law in the past and has gotten a break and here is in a situation where he's under the influence driving in the wrong lane after a carjacking and takes this precious young woman's life.
And are you surprised Michael DeWitt faced federal charges in this case for carjacking resulting in death, but he still faces that state charge of murder as well, too?
Yeah, so this was creative prosecuting. I mean, certainly this was a gunpoint carjacking, and he in the act of taking this vehicle or evading apprehension, he caused the death of this young woman. So clearly, the federal statute applied, and it's not double jeopardy to try someone federally for a crime and then try them again in state court for a crime. So double jeopardy only applies if it's the federal court seeking to prosecute somebody for the same offense twice, or a state court seeking to prosecute somebody for the same crime twice. In this situation, double jeopardy doesn't apply. So it's completely appropriate to prosecute him federally and then seek prosecution in state court as well.
And does that federal charge come from Michael DeWitt being on that highway? Is that kind of what made him get that federal charge?
It appears that there is a federal statute, a carjacking statute, that says that if you take a vehicle by force and in the course of doing that, cause injury or serious bodily injury, or in this case, death, that you can be prosecuted federally for that, and the sentences are quite dramatic in terms of the federal statute. So, frankly, DeWitt could have received life in prison for this because it was a carjacking that resulted in death. He got this 20 plus year sentence, which is still probably more significant than he would have received or will receive in state courts.
Yeah, and just, learning through reports, more about Madeline here, she seemed like a typical teenager. She was a cheerleader. She was about to go off to college. She dropped her brother off on that day for his job, picked him up from practice and dropped him off for his job that day, was driving her usual route home. And then she's hit by all accounts, this kind of maniac on the roads in a stolen truck. I can't even imagine just hearing that from her family side or her loved one's side, just everything that she had went through. What's your reaction to just this typical teenager doing everything right and had a good life ahead of her, and then this happens?
Right. I mean, the pain for her family, Elizabeth, is unimaginable. I mean, it's the suffering that they endured. This young woman with such a bright future, already admitted to college. Having successfully gotten through or in the process of completing her scholastic career. On a high school level, and just to have her taken from her family in such a senseless act. You have a guy who is out on bond, a very low bond. He's a guy who's under the influence, who takes a vehicle at gunpoint, and then head on collision, crossing the center lane and killing this young woman. Is devastating to say the least.
Yeah, and as a former prosecutor, what all goes into a plea deal? In your experience, especially in murder cases, what do you kind of hear from the victim's family? Did they typically prefer, saving themselves from just the heartache of going through a trial, or in some cases, did victims' families actually prefer to go to trial?
Well, yeah, that's you can go in a number of different directions here. I mean, everybody handles grief in a different way. Everybody looks at the criminal justice system when they are a victim, or the family of a victim in a different way. And here, I sense that there was a lot that went into this plea. There was a lot of discussion, I'm sure, between the prosecutors and the family with regard to this case. As I said, it's a significant sentence. 20 years on a federal level. It doesn't mean in 10 years you're going to be eligible for parole. In federal court, you do 20 and a half years. Now, you might get some time off for good behavior, but you're going to do a significant portion of that 20 and a half year sentence. Plus, there's 5 years of supervision. So, you know, uh, prosecutors are always very cognizant of the family's position, of how they view this process and how they view justice. A family doesn't necessarily dictate how a case is going to be resolved because there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it weighs heavily in terms of a prosecutor reaching out to try to resolve a case.
And I kind of want to go back to a point that you had made earlier in our discussion. At the time that this all happened, Michael Dewitt was out on bond for another charge when this had all happened. And now, because of Madelynn's death and because of the tragedy that all had happened there, there's a new law in effect that charitable organizations, they can't donate now more than $5,000, I believe it is, to help people get out of bail. What is your reaction kind of to that? Because I'm sure maybe the organization at the time, probably just wanted to help, thought they were doing the right thing, and then this
Mhm.
happened. So what's kind of your reaction to all of that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of um, work being done across the country with regard to bail reform. So there are a lot of um, jurisdictions that are looking at the manner in which they grant bail, and frankly, I think what we should be looking at closely is not necessarily people that aggravate us because they've been back multiple times for you know um, low level offenses like shoplifting and things like that. But we should be looking at the people that scare us, the people who have potential to do harm. And you can do that in a number of ways. There's actuarial tools that determine risk. Certainly, the history of a defendant is also sort of a precursor to what the future might look like for that defendant. So I think we have to do a better job in this country of evaluating, what people should be sitting in jail pre-trial and which should not be. In this case, it appears that there was some violence in this person's past history. The bond of $5,000 is a relatively low bond, and then you have a charitable organization that steps in and says, well, we're going to post that bond because he has a drug and alcohol problem and should get rehabilitation, which he's not going to receive while he's in jail. Well, we see what the result of that is. And I believe the statute is named for Madelynn's law, I believe. And it's going to try to put some limits on what charitable organizations can do in terms of bonding somebody out. I mean, here we don't know the full circumstances of the prior crime that he was released on. But we know what the end result is in this situation, and that is that had this organization not posted his bail, he may have still been in jail and this death may not have occurred. And that's really, really, I'm sure, a horrific thought for the family that this could have been prevented, but was not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even years after this happened, because, that was back in 2021, I still can't even imagine what Madelynn's family is feeling or thinking right now. But hopefully, this is the start to some form of justice for them. Matt, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, though, where do you think everything goes from here? Do you see Michael DeWitt possibly getting another plea deal in the state murder charge?
Well, I think the state will certainly pursue the charges because, you have the driving under the influence, you have the murder charge, which is pending against him. You know, maybe you'll see some sort of concurrent sentence where he's sentenced in state court, but that state sentence runs at the same time the federal sentence runs because ultimately, as I said, this is a lengthy sentence. Although it's a tragic death, in the grand scheme of things, 20 years is a pretty significant sentence. So I don't know that they're they're going to add on to that with a state prosecution.
Guess we'll have to wait and see how this continues to play out. Matt, again, thank you so much for your time and your insight into this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always great talking with you.
Michael Dewitt was sentenced to 20 years and 5 months in federal prison, which will also be followed by 5 years of supervised release. He won't have a chance of parole because there's no parole in the federal system. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.